Hey guys, it's Jasma, and today we're going back to the basics and I'm showing you everything that you need to know about making dumplings. There are many parts to making dumplings, but I'll be breaking it all down in this video, starting from how to make your very own dumpling wrappers, your own filling, how to balance out the ratio of the wrapper and the filling so that you don't end up with too much of either or. I'll also be showing you a couple different ways to wrap these dumplings, how to cook them, and also how to store at the very end. This is quite a comprehensive guide, so even if you've never made dumplings before, hopefully by the end you'll feel confident about giving it a try. First, we're making our own dumpling wrappers. My family never buys store-bought wrappers because of three main reasons. Firstly, it's just much more flexible because then you aren't limited to making dumplings only when you have store-bought wrappers. Secondly, homemade wrappers are stretchier, so the texture is also better when you eat it. Thirdly, you can adjust the thickness and size of your own wrappers. This way you can modify your dumplings to match your own preferences. Now, the main question that you need to answer when it comes to making your own wrappers is how much dough do you actually need in accordance to how many dumplings you wish to make. So first you gotta figure out how many dumplings you wanna make. Now the usual guide for my family is about 15 dumplings for each person, and I loosely follow the ratio of 12 grams of wrapper with 15 grams of filling for each dumpling. It makes for a fairly average sized dumpling, but you can change up that ratio if you would like. So just multiply the average weight of each wrapper with the quantity of dumplings you wish to make, and you'll result with the total amount of dough you're gonna need. When making dumpling wrappers, you want to use all-purpose flour or bread flour because it has more gluten in it, so you're going to result in a stretchier wrapper. The amount of liquid that different types of flours from different brands require can vary just a little bit, so you do want to try this out, figure out the right consistency, and it almost takes a little bit of trial and error to get correct. To make dough that is suitable for wrapping dumplings, you need a 2-to-1 flour to water ratio. The water is flexible by plus or minus 5% of the flour's total weight, and whether you add or take away liquid is dependent on the type of flour you are using. There isn't a whole lot of technique to making your own wrappers, but you do want to give it a ton of time. So always make your wrappers first before moving on to the filling, because the dough requires a lot of time to rest so that the gluten can loosen up and result in a stretchier and softer dough. So now let's begin making the dough. First, add some salt to your flour and mix it together. Adding a little salt to the dough strengthens its gluten, which makes the overall dough stretchier, but you only have to do this for all-purpose flour since bread flour already has enough gluten in it. Then slowly add the water to the flour and mixing it in as you go. Once all the water is incorporated and you have these shaggy bits, transfer it onto a clean surface. I usually do this all in my stand mixer with a hook attachment, but I'm going to show you how you can do it by hand as well. So just push the flour together, and your main goal right now really is to just form a cohesive dough. Add more water if you need to, but do that in small increments. It helps to rip up the bigger pieces of dough when kneading by hand to incorporate the additional liquid a little easier. So just keep kneading, and slowly everything will come together to form a cohesive ball of dough. I'm using organic all-purpose flour from Costco, and the amount of liquid that it took to reach this stage is 55% of the all-purpose flour. The dough has come together, there are no more dry bits left. It is still going to be quite tough, and there could be some rough bits in there, so the dough doesn't have to be completely smooth, but that completes the first round of kneading. I'm going to cover this now and let it rest for 20 minutes. And if you feel like multitasking, during this time you can go on to make the filling. After resting, you can notice that the dough is a lot softer and it'll be a lot easier to knead. So I'm going to knead it until it forms a nice and smooth ball and there are no more those small clumps of flour. Do not add any more flour or water to this because you don't want to mess up the ratio. When it comes to making dumpling wrappers, you actually want the dough to be pretty stiff because if it's too soft, then it won't hold its shape when you try and wrap up the dumpling. Once it forms a smooth ball like this, I'm going to put it back into the bowl, cover again, and let it sit for another 20 minutes or even longer until you are ready to wrap the dumplings. On to making the filling for these dumplings. There are endless variations of different flavor combinations that you can make for dumplings, which is probably one of the really great things about it because it's so flexible, so you can quite literally add anything you want into it. But for the most part, there's a combination of different types of meats and vegetables to make this filling. Similar to the dumpling wrappers, you also need to figure out how much filling you need to make the desired number of dumplings in the very end. So as I mentioned before, my average dumpling holds about 15 grams of filling, so just multiply 15 by however many dumplings you want to make, and you'll have the total weight of filling that you need. And in terms of the ratio of the veggie to the meat, I usually just go 1-to-1 because it feels more balanced that way. For today, I'm going to show you my favorite flavor of dumplings, which is made of a combination of beef, onion, carrot, celery, and black fungus, which is a very wide variety of different vegetables. So it's a very healthy dumpling, and also the flavor is just something I really enjoy. I do plan on giving you guys lots of different recipes for other flavors as well, but this is what we're going to focus on today. Begin by preparing your ingredients. Here I'm soaking some dried black fungus in water so that it can soften up and expand. I'm also briefly chopping up my carrot, celery, onion, and ginger. Then to make my life easier, I'm using a food processor to blend everything into smaller bits. You can also chop your ingredients by hand or use a grater. I'm opening up my package of lean ground veal, and to it I'm going to add in 1 egg, a nice amount of salt, ground pepper, the minced ginger, and oyster sauce. Then begin mixing. Again, I'm doing this by hand just to show you that it's possible and that it's actually not that difficult. It just takes a little bit of arm muscle, but usually I would be doing this using my stand mixer and a paddle attachment. Once all the ingredients are incorporated, I'm going to slowly mix in some water. This is going to loosen up the meat and make the texture of the filling so much better. When mixing, be sure to only do this in one direction. This is the part that actually takes a little bit of strength, so that's why I like to use my stand mixer, and the longer you do this, the softer the meat will be. Finally, just add in the other ingredients, give it a mix until fully incorporated, and that is your filling all ready to go. Before we can wrap the dumplings, we have to turn the rested dough into actual dumpling wrappers. So here I'm just cutting the dough into quarters so I can work with smaller portions, and be sure to keep the rest of the dough covered while you're not working with it because it will dry out. Create a ring using your hands and then cut it so you end up with a snake like this. Then just cut the dough into smaller portions like this and try your absolute best to make them all the same size. Lightly toss it in some flour, and now we can begin to roll the wrappers. After gently pressing down the dough, you want to use your rolling pin to flatten out the edges while continuously rotating your wrapper using your other hand. The center of the wrapper should be slightly thicker than the edges. On to wrapping the dumplings, which is the fun part. I'm going to show you a few of my favorite ways to wrap your dumplings, but there are endless variations to how you can do it. I'm starting with the most classic design. So place a dollop of the filling onto the center of your wrapper. Use your index finger to form ruffles on one side of the dumpling while using your index finger and thumb to continuously pinch together the dough. Make sure everything is fully sealed, and that is your completed dumpling. I don't know if there are actual names for dumpling folds, but I'm calling this one the seashell because it looks like a seashell. Once you have the filling in the wrapper, use one hand to make really small folds and the other hand to pinch it all together. Once you've done this to half of the dumpling wrapper, you can see that it's already coming together. Then just slowly seal the rest of the wrapper. You might need to push down the filling if you have too much inside of it, but just be sure that you pinch everything together so nothing leaks out of the dumpling. This one I called the French braid. So once again, have the wrapper and the filling ready to go, and then begin pinching the wrapper with your thumb and index finger on one end of the dumpling. Keep pinching the dough and moving along the center of the dumpling all the way until you reach the end, and then just seal everything together nice and tightly. This is a little bit difficult to describe, so hopefully these angles are helpful. I'm not fully sure what to call this one, but it looks a bit like a snail. So you're going to start by pinching the end of your dumpling, but continue doing that without letting go, so it almost forms a spiral at only one end of the dumpling. Then you're going to continue folding this just like any regular dumpling so that it can kind of elongate itself into a pointed end, and that is what's going to form the snail-like shape of it. Then as always, just pinch everything until it's nice and tight. This is the Chinese gold ingot, a pretty traditional fold. So do the taco fold, but seal the entire edge, so I guess it looks like a semicircle, moon, pierogi, whatever you want to call it. And then just flip it so the two corners are facing up. Fold the two corners together until they overlap and just pinch it together till sealed. This one is called the squeeze because that's quite literally all you're doing. You're just squeezing together the dumpling. So fold the center of the wrapper after doing the taco fold, and then line up your index finger and thumb on both sides and then just squeeze it. Then you have a completed dumpling. This last one is called the leaf. Start off exactly the same way as we did for the previous one. Just pinch the center after folding it like a taco, and then begin folding ruffles on one end of the dumpling and pinching it together just like a regular dumpling. But then you're going to rotate this and do the same with the other end in a different direction. That is what's going to form the leafy shape. Just make sure you pinch everything really tightly together, and there you have it. To cook your dumplings, you can either boil it, pan fry, or steam it. Steaming is a little more complex, so today I'm just going to show you how to boil or pan fry, and you can choose which method you prefer. To pan fry your dumplings, start by greasing a non-stick pan with some oil, then place your dumplings into the pan, spreading out the oil the best you can, and leaving a little bit of space between each one. Now pour in a little bit of cold water until about a quarter of the dumplings are submerged. Place on the lid and turn the heat to high. Once the water starts to boil, turn the heat down to medium. When you feel like the majority of the liquid is evaporated, you can take off the lid and turn the heat back onto high. Then just keep an eye on it until there's no more water left in the pan. Give it a quick shake to see if the bottom is nice and golden brown, and once it is, you can take it off the heat. To boil the dumplings, add a generous amount of salt into some boiling water, then carefully drop in the dumplings and gently give it a stir. This is just to make sure nothing is sticking. Then place on the lid and allow this to come to a boil. Once it comes to a rolling boil, take off the lid and pour in some cold water. This just drops the overall temperature of your boiling water, and so it cooks the dumplings in a more gentle way. If you cook your dumplings the entire time that it requires to be cooked in a rolling boil, you can very easily risk tearing the dumplings or having it break apart. So just do that process once more, wait for the water to come to a boil, add in a little cold water, and then wait for it to boil again, and then your dumplings are ready. If you don't want to cook all your dumplings the day of, you can freeze these to save for later. Just lay them flat on a baking tray and cover it, allow it to become frozen, and then just store it in any sort of Ziploc bag, and you can cook it off whenever you want. When it comes to cooking fresh dumplings, you want to cook it inside of already boiled water. However, for frozen dumplings, you want to broil it in cold water. Because frozen dumplings take longer to cook compared to regular dumplings, so that means it has to be in the water for a longer amount of time. The reason why we boil frozen dumplings inside of cold water first is so that it doesn't tear the wrapping. Finally, we get to enjoy these dumplings. So to serve, I always like to pair my dumplings with vinegar and minced garlic. And if you're into spices, you can also add some chili oil into the mix. And that, my friends, is it with this video. I hope you found it helpful and now you feel ready to take on dumplings. Thank you so much for watching and see you soon.